that Leah and Ian are very excited to share.
They're kittens.
Which are being very kitten-like.
Yeah.
Right now.
The black one, that's Nugget. And this boy is Smokey. He's our cuddle one.
He's camera shy.
The other day, Serina colluded with the neighbors to drop by with a couple kittens at like what 10 p.m. or something.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, you're not allowed to tell this story anymore, right? Ian has been making the story out into, it's like a fish story. Every time he tells it, he makes me sound worse.
I kept the details the same.
But, so the neighbors had kittens, and so tell them about the neighbors having kittens. I was like, oh, send a picture, and then they just brought them over. And yeah, sure, they came over at 9:30, but also they literally saw me out in the yard. Okay, stop.
Where's the cat?
I don't know. There's lots of toys. So they're pulling on the
charging cord.
Oh, he's found a good toy. He's found
don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, so the neighbors had little barn cats that were living outside, and they got rid of all the rest of the kittens, and they got rid of the mom, and they only had these two left, and they were like, oh, maybe you guys want, well, and they were like, oh yeah, we have these kittens, we're trying to get rid of them, and I was like, oh, kittens, send me a picture, and I'll try to convince Ian to take one of them. And then they brought them over, and I was like, Ian, we should take both of them. And he was like, had hard eyes, and was like, yes, I'm convinced.
They are adorable. And because they're our neighbors' cats, and they were living outside, so they're already used to the area being outside. They brought them over when they caught them. They're hard.
Okay, careful.
They're hard to catch.
Yeah, they surprised me too. They were like, oh, whoever gets ready first gets the prize.
Yes. After school, yeah. We didn't.
Yes.
You don't have to yell.
You can tell the story.
You made us go crazy.
Well, you didn't think that there was a surprise, but I told you there was a surprise.
I asked if it was cats, and you said no.
You asked.
It wasn't cats. It was kittens.
Well, you asked if it was a cat, so I was doing the technicality that it was cats.
Also kittens.
They're very cute.
But
I tried really hard to get them to be named Bub and Bob after Bubble Bobble from the arcade game Bust a Move.
It didn't work.
And it didn't work.
We're basically going through Serina's cat bucket list at this point in time.
Oh, come on.
No.
This is no. Nugget is my bucket list.
Yeah, this is Nugget, and then the gray one is Smokey.
I named him.
But we like having two kittens at the same time. Because
it's very calm having two kittens at the same time.
Because they just play together all the time instead of attacking the other cats. So the adult cats are kind of like...
Whatever.
But,
but they're also trying really hard to eat the charging cord.
Yeah, so that may be problematic.
Mommy, can we
Okay, we are going to talk about...
Maybe I will do...
We're gonna talk about
the cats might not be tenable in here because they're going for the cord.
Yeah, they probably need to have the door.
Don't pick them up like that.
We're gonna talk about perennial Latin.
Ooh.
Okay.
This is
everybody.
Okay, do you want to say anything else about kittens?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Okay, then take the chaos out, please. Okay. Say, look how cute they are. Look how cute they are. Okay.
We want pink.
Okay, but
Can you?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so kitten. So we got them about 2 weeks ago, and it's been really hard to get anything done on the farm, because they're so adorable. We just want to be inside, just kissing the kittens all day. So Ian and Leah were very excited to show them off for the live video. But now I'm inside my house in the middle of the chaos for the live video. So, we'll see how this goes. But so what I wanted to talk about with the topic of about lilies is I want to complain a little bit about the weather being so problematic. Because so I'm gonna explain the weather being really bad, and then I'm gonna explain how my worst case scenario was that we weren't gonna have flowers, which happened. We took a week off from market because we didn't. There basically was like no focals in order to make bouquets, and now at this point we're able to have bouquets because we have lilies. But if it wasn't for lilies, we really wouldn't have much happening on the farm. And I think it's a good demonstration of the importance of having like perennials in your flower farm plan. In our early days when we started the farm, flowers were only part of what we were doing. The main thing that we were doing was veggies, and so we had all these spring veggie crops, and the flowers were mainly just summer flowers. We were doing sunflowers and amaranth and basil and zinnias and cosmos, and so the bouquets were mostly just late July, August, September. It was just a small window, and we were going to market May, June with greens and vegetables. And so as we started to do better with the flowers, we started to push more for the season, right? And so now at this point, we have a farm plan for the flowers that has us starting kind of end of April with the tulips. And then we go and, we comfortably could go a few weeks after frost. We'd have to stop for any sort of hard freeze because our tunnels are unheated. But with the tunnels, if we really wanted, we could probably push to the end of October, beginning of November, even on good years. But instead, we stop for Canadian Thanksgiving, which is like mid-October, because we find after that point, the sales are so limited that it doesn't necessarily make sense. Though this year with our employee, we might actually, we're talking about kind of going all year with having like Christmas greenery and then having dried flowers throughout the winter, because we have an employee who's going to be with us over the winter. So we need something to fill all those hours and to keep a little bit of money coming in. Yeah. Okay. So here's a couple questions. Ian is off doing dinner for the kids because we were unorganized today. Our next video is almost done. We are going to put it out, I think, on Wednesday at this point. We just have a little bit of work left to do. Too much, like, we have a few things that we're doing today, but I think we'll get it done tomorrow. So it'll go out on Wednesday morning. And do we still have a vegetable garden for your own consumption? We do. We planted like 200 tomatoes this year. And we have a few other small things planted. But we've been pretty busy this year. I still don't have zucchinis planted. I need to plant them this week. They're on the this week job. But yeah, and then I want to do some like beets and stuff for the fall. But it's kind of like the home garden only comes after the flower farm is planted, and it's just, it's hard to stay on top of the farm. How were the peonies? The peonies that we planted in the winter, they came up really good, nice and strong plants. They all budded, and like probably about half of them ended up flowering, and then we cut the flowers off when like very short, leave all the greenery on. And they're doing good. With peonies, you kind of want to grow them out for about 3 years before you're really starting to harvest, because you don't want to take any leaves off. So in the videos, I'm trying to think where we are at the videos. I think we're getting pretty close to caught up on the videos. The one that's coming out is from like 2 weeks ago. So I think maybe in the last video that we put out, we might have had some peony bouquets, and that's from when we first moved here 5 years ago. I found like 6 peonies that were on like blowout in the middle of the summer, very sad looking, $5 plants, and I planted them in our just home garden. And they actually produced really good this year. I wouldn't be surprised if I picked like 75 peonies off of just those plants. I got a lot of peonies off of them. So I did end up getting to use some peonies. Let's see. What are some perennials that would bloom now to give you more diversity? Okay. And that's, yeah. So I'll get into that. But first, are the tomatoes in the tunnel or outdoor rows? The tomatoes are outside. The Okanagan has like insane perfect conditions for tomatoes. There's no tomato disease at all. Probably partially because it doesn't rain ever. So we don't have to grow the tomatoes covered for them to be healthy and happy. And then we have really hot Septembers. So tomatoes produce really good outside of tunnels. Part of the reason why we always put the tomatoes in the tunnels before was to get them to start earlier. It was just to get them to produce earlier, not necessarily to get them to produce any later. And then we use the tunnel, the structure of the tunnel, because we would run the beams up above as a way of like trellising them. So it was a good use of the tunnel space. Okay, lily pest control. We don't have like the lily beetles. We don't have any. There's no bugs that attack lilies at all here. So my lily pest control is that I do nothing. We don't, and the truth of it for pest control just on the farm is we don't do anything for pest control. And so we do lose crops sometimes. Aphids are a really common pest here in the Okanagan. It's hot and it's dry, and so even drought tolerant plants can suffer from the conditions. And so when the plants are kind of, suffering a little bit, it makes them susceptible to the aphids, and then the aphids move in. Roses are a perfect example. Even though I got rose catalogs from Van Noort in the mail, and I was looking at them today going, oh, Ian, we should buy some roses. Look how beautiful these roses are. We probably will never grow roses for cut flowers because roses are just so susceptible to aphids here. And I don't want to have to spray to have flowers. So yeah, what we do for bugs is we do nothing, and then if things are really buggy, then we just don't use it. If there's a little bit of bugs, it's like, it's just kind of like, okay. Most of them kind of like leave in the cooler or jump off when you have them in buckets and stuff. So it's not like, I'm sending buggy, gross bouquets to anyone. But yeah. Okay, so perennials. Okay, so I'm gonna go into. I'm gonna buy roses for next year. It was tempting because I'm gonna get into what I'm gonna talk about, but first I'm gonna talk about my temptation for roses. So the tomatoes did so good, and we've been talking more and more. The tomato seedlings at the roadside stand did so good this year for so little effort. That we've been talking a lot about doing more of that. And especially, kind of the plan all along was to start to do perennials in pots to sell, because they're kind of year-round sales. They're not like, oh, lettuce seedlings in the spring. I can pot them up into, like a larger pot and then keep them happily alive and put them out at the stand for sale. And so another thing that we've talked about is maybe having some peonies also, maybe getting a few extra peonies and potting up the peonies to have for sale out at the stand. And so I was kind of like, well, I was driving around with Ian today going like, oh, daylilies, they have all these incredible daylilies, but you have to buy them by a 25 pack minimum and I'm like, I don't need 25 in our home gardens. Oh, thank you so much, Mother Nature's Apothecary. A gift for all the virtual bouquets I get to enjoy because of you and Ian. Your content is a ray of sunshine. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. You know, that's one thing that we always say. Even if the bouquets don't sell, because sometimes it's hard to have leftover bouquets that, it's like, oh, there's only so many bouquets you can have in the house, and we give most of our bouquets away, but some of them do end up in the compost pile, and it's always like, oh, it hurts. But we're always like, you know what? All of these bouquets got enjoyed in the videos and like in the pictures. So, even if where they end up in the long run is being composted, they still bring so much joy. So thank you for letting me know that you appreciate, because that's one of our goals. Okay, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so yes, basically I'm rambling about. I'm basically I'm shopping, because it won't be long until in the fall. The fall is when you start doing your spring shopping. So pretty soon I'll be looking at the perennials to show up for the spring. I'll be looking at, being like, oh, what plugs am I going to be buying for next year? What seeds should I be getting my hands on? It feels really early being, summer. It's only just summer. But, in the next month or two, I do need to be making a plan for what I want to do next year. And so, the idea of buying some of these perennials, I keep like 5 of them for the garden, and then I pot up 20 to be able to sell at the stand. Seems like something that we're going to do next year. And so I was like, oh, well, roses, I could get some climbing roses. We have this trellis that I've never put anything on. It's like, oh, like I could buy, they had all these like mixed packs. So they had like a 50 pack or a 200 pack. I'm like, oh, I could buy like 200 and plant a few and then sell them all. But, I have to do my best to restrain myself. I need to give myself a budget. Be like, this is the nursery. This is the nursery budget. Don't go crazy. You can only get so much. Stay focused, because it all snowballs. You buy the plants, and then you have to buy the pots, and then you have to buy the potting soil, and then next thing I know, I'm stuck. I'm stuck trying to pot up everything like a crazy person all April, while I'm also trying to get the tulips all harvested. So stay focused. Okay, so the story with the title, the thing that I want to share with you guys. And then we'll do questions again at the end. So this year the weather was crazy town, and like climate instability, the reality is the weather's always going to be crazy every year from now until I die. But this year it was really difficult. And like we've had like almost every year that we've been farming here, we've had some really difficult weather conditions to deal with. Other than like our first year, we had a major heat wave in June a couple years ago. Last year, like it was really, really cold. We had this like really late spring. And so the heat wave year, that like I was very worried, but it ended up that the heat wave just made all of our summer crops produce really early. We had a lot of success. The cold year last year led to a lot of success because we had such amazing production on our ranunculus and our anemones. These kind of spring crops that we normally really struggle with here instead did really good, and they stretched out the season. Even though my summer plants started later, the spring stuff went later. But this year it was both things. So winter went 3 weeks late, and so the way that I track how the temperature, like what the weather is doing, for knowing when the farm can start is by crocuses. When crocuses bloom, it means that the soil has finally warmed up enough that that seeds will germinate. And so I often put in seeds way earlier than when the crocuses bloom. We usually are planting seeds in March, and crocuses are usually blooming like end of March. And the reason is because it's very dry in the Okanagan, and I live on a sand pit. And so the snow melts in the end of February, and like the day after the snow melts, it's dry. I can plant. So we start farm prepping really early, a lot earlier than most areas would, because most areas have to wait until the soil's dry to kind of work their soil. But for us, the snow melts and we're instantly out there. We can till up and clean up the garden, and I can put the seeds in. And so when I put the seeds in for cool crops, like all the cold hardy annuals, stuff like, good examples, larkspur. So we've had really, really good luck with larkspur when we direct seed it, and 30 in Grand Forks. That's pretty cool. I mean, Grand Forks does get hot. We're definitely in, like, it's hot today. I'm in this room and I'm like, oh, it's hot in here. It's probably, like, I think it was low 30s here in Kelowna today. Okay, distracted. I'm the type of person who could, like, happily talk about the weather, like, all day. I used to work at a shoe store in the mall, and I really like doing retail because I just get to, like, talk about the weather. Like small talk. I'm like the person who will talk to you about the weather in the grocery store lineup. So, okay, stay focused. I need to talk about past weather, not current weather. Yeah, okay. So larkspur, I have really good luck with direct seeding it, great germination. I've heard lots of people struggle with it. And I think part of the reason why I have such good luck with larkspur is, first of all, I use fresh seed. Larkspur is one of the crops that you can't, like, I use so this year, it's like some of my larkspur seeds are 3 years old, and the germination was like spotty. When I tested it, it was like still 50%. So I was like, whatever, I'll just use it. But larkspur is a seed that you do kind of want to only buy 2 years worth of. You don't want to do multiple years. Because the seed life like sharply declines on it. But okay, larkspur. I have good luck with larkspur, I think, because I plant it out a few weeks before the soil, when the crocuses bloom, when the soil finally is warm enough to induce germination on cool crops. I think because it's in the ground for a few weeks where it's freezing, warming up, freezing, that process is called like cold stratification, which is something that you have to do for getting a lot of seeds to germinate. I'm not doing it intentionally. I'm just doing it because I want to get my seeds in the ground, and then they'll germinate when they germinate. And if the seeds are in the ground, then when the weather warms up, it goes. I don't have to worry about my seeds rotting in the ground because my soil isn't wet. So yeah, that's my larkspur trick. But my point is that the crocuses bloomed 3 weeks late this year, which means that I didn't get seeds in the ground. Oh, thank you so much, Black Dog Apiary. You're always so generous. We really appreciate. I was looking at my Black Dog Apiary garden, and it's looking a little sad. I was like, I have to clean it up so I can eventually, like, I have to make it look more like, okay, it looks like a real garden again because it's been overgrown by grass. And then I can like put it in one of my farm tours and be like, this is the Black Dog garden. Okay, but yeah, so I didn't get seeds in March, and I wasn't worried about it. I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna wait until, because it was so cold. Like the ground was frozen. I didn't get seeds in because it was like the ground was still frozen. I couldn't even work the soil to get the cedar out there. And then it was 3 weeks late for the crocuses blooming. And then we went straight from that, right? Because kind of I was like, okay, when the crocuses bloom, then I'll get this window of a few weeks before the tulips start, where I'll be able to get all my seeds in and get everything kind of going for the year for all my cold hardy stuff. I had my cold hardy annuals that I didn't direct seed. So my things like Strawflower and Status and Feverfew and Rudbeckia, Fama scabiosa. I had all of that started nice and early. Everything started on schedule. And so, you know, I was like, okay, like once it comes, I'll be able to get the stuff out. The Lysianthus will go into the tunnel, you know, and then just so cold, so cold. And then following that, we went pretty much straight to this heat wave where it got up to 30 degrees. And so, and like, if you know, and like our videos are so behind that it's kind of, you know, our last month of videos was kind of showing that where the tulips were starting to bloom, and they went crazy, right? Because they're not meant to handle heat like that. The heat induced them to bloom. The heat caused stuff to bloom before the buds were even developed. We had a lot of, it's called bud abortion, and so bud abortion is when they're like, it looks like it's gonna, like a bud is forming, and then it just dries out and dies. We also had a lot of really strange things in the tulips that other flower farmers had, which like doubles were singles, or they almost look mutated. Like people were like, oh, are my tulips diseased? What's happening? And it was just the heat. The heat, you know, they got past the point where the bud abortion happened, but it was kind of like, you know, they were developing and then the heat stopped their development. And so they were never able to fully develop properly. Yeah, it was just crazy. And so, you know, if you watch the videos, I'm like, okay, it's fine. There's a heat wave. It'll be a week. We put up all the shade cloth. Like, we just need to, I was like, I'll water really a lot. We just like need to get past this weather. Like, it'll just be a week, because that's kind of how long like heat waves usually last for. They kind of roll in, they stick for a week, and then the weather cycle will kind of shift. But this heat that came instead, it stuck around for 3 or 4 weeks. And so what was happening in the garden at the time, while I was like desperately trying to deal with the tulips, and you know, I wasn't overly stressed about the tulips, because I was like, whatever, I'll get what I can get. You get what you get, and you don't get upset. But you know, I was pretty stressed about what was happening in the main farm. But not everything always makes it into the videos. You know, like, you know, I'll sometimes only talk about, you know, what I'm working on. And so I don't know, I don't even know if I've talked about this before, but so I had all my cool annual, my cold hardy annual crops seeded into the farm. There was like about 5 beds in total that were seeded. So stuff like larkspur, saponaria, what's that green? The quinoa. I can't remember. I'm brain farting on the name. But this green, Beplurum. You know, like honestly, I can't even remember everything that I have seeded, because so what happened is I seeded these beds. It was seed that should have popped up, you know, in kind of like 5 days in how things normally go. And I watched it, and like I watered to make like, is it too dry because the heat? I was doing everything right to get the germination to happen, and it just, nothing germinated. And you know, I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty confident the reason why is it was so hot that I was outside of the temperature range for germination for these cooler crops. Because these crops, you have to grow them in early spring. You can't grow them in the summer because you can't germinate them. They won't grow in the heat. So I had them in the ground, but they just weren't growing. So, you know, and the problem with that is what is available for picking following the following the end of the kind of spring season of the tulips and the ranunculus and the anemones and the peonies and things like that. After those are finished, these are the crops that need to be there for me before my summer crops start. And then the other complication that I was having is that because it had been so late for so long, I wasn't able to plant my summer crops in time. So my summer crops, which would normally be planted out in early May, because of all the cold weather, I realized like, oh, it's really cold. I didn't start my summer crops because I was like, it's too cold. The problem with the summer crops is that they're really hard to time. And like, so things like zinnias and cosmos and celosia. It's just like my brain went blank. These, to get a head start on summer, because we're Canada, things are a little bit slower and a little shorter. I tend to do some of them started ahead of time, but I've learned in the past that they really suffer from being root bound. So they're difficult to time because you can't plant them out when there's any sort of frost because they're so frost sensitive that they'll die. So you have to hold them in the trays until the frost is passed. But if you hold them in the trays for more than a week, they get so stunted from being in the trays instead of being transplanted at the right time that you might as well direct seed them at the same time. So if going forward in the future, ideally what I should do is I should start a couple successions of these types of crops. And I should start 2 weeks, like April 1st, I start zinnias and cosmos and celosia. And at 3 weeks, if at the end of April they're not ready to be planted, then I throw them in the compost, which is fine because April 14th, I actually started another round of these because I knew that I needed to start the 2 rounds of the seedlings to get one of the 2 rounds to be timed correctly for planting. But I didn't do that this year. That is what I'm going to hopefully do moving forward. This year I just waited because I was like, it's so cold. There's no point. I can just direct seed these once it warms up. And so my summer crops were planted so late because the weather was so cold that I didn't actually plant them. It wasn't like when this heat hit, I could take advantage of it by planting the summer crops early, because the heat hit so early in the year. So it was this really horrible timing. And so what it meant is I have no cool crops this year. The cool crops that I started as seedlings, so stuff like the status and the straw flowers, the rudbeckia, feverfew, they did get planted out, but the plants were so stunted and sad because they were like just held way too long in as seedlings because I started them so early, that they're not blooming early because they had to recover from suffering as seedlings. My rudbeckia and my feverfew from this year, it's probably not even going to flower. I have it planted out so that it can develop to, over winter to maybe be there for me next year. So it's not 100% of a loss, but it means that all my feverfew that I'm using this year is just, I'm dependent on what survived the winter, which luckily is lots because I think I have 3 beds of feverfew in total throughout the farm. So even though I get, 50-60% crop loss on it over the winter, that's still lots of plants. And then the rudbeckia, like I get 50% loss on the rudbeckia, but at this point, there's only so much rudbeckia you need. My status is starting to grow, but I'm probably still like a good 3 weeks out on my status. Straw flowers are going to be like short and stunted. I'm not going to get long stems on it, which is fine because the plan was to only harvest heads off of the straw flowers. The plan this year for straw flowers was to mostly grow them for making the ornaments. We're going to make a really big push for the Christmas ornaments. And because we have Nellie here over the winter, we are going to finally get organized to get them shipped because she'll be able to help me with doing the shipping over the winter, so they'll be available for you guys. It'll be like one of the first times that, you know, we'll actually have a farm product that can be shipped, because I know a lot of you guys asked for that. But because they're going to be stunted, the straw flowers, it's fine for what the plan is, but the straw flowers aren't there to save me, to have them early for, you know, this kind of in-between window. If there's larkspur in the farm, every single piece of it is going to be saved to dry so that I can have larkspur for the Christmas ornaments. I'm going to prioritize that over the in the bouquets. Snaps, that's a great one. So we had all these snapdragons started. They got held in the tray too long. So I didn't even bother planting them out because I knew that they were too root bound to ever do anything. And the snapdragons that I bought as plugs, which I planted out because the conditions were so bad, they got planted out when it was cold, so they suffered when it was cold, and then it went straight to heat. And so because of that, the plugs that I bought and planted never developed properly, so the snapdragons are like very sad. They're like embarrassing. I'm using them in the bouquets. They're working as like a filler. But it's not like I have beautiful snapdragon bouquets like what I've had in past years to be able to kind of get me through this season as having options as well. So basically, this is the worst case scenario, which I was worried about, which was, and the other crazy thing that happened is, which isn't so much of an issue for me, because my peonies are too immature to be harvesting off of. But we do, I have other flower farmers that I'm connected with. So, you know, when I'm really desperate, I can buy flowers from the other flower farmers to use in the bouquets for the farm stand. But because of the crazy weather, the peonies actually bloomed like 3 weeks early. So when there would have been potentially peonies available to use in bouquets, kind of like when there's this gap, even the peonies weren't really available. The peonies ended up blooming, like I had an early peony bloom at the same time as my tulips. Like it was crazy. It was just a crazy year. But yeah, so worst case scenario from the weather, as I was like looking at the farm and nothing was growing and things weren't planted, was that I would have no flowers available to sell. That I'd have this gap where I wouldn't be able to bring things to the market because there wouldn't be things to pick on the farm. And that pretty much happened last week. We had feverfew and we had yarrow. We have lots of yarrow this year. The yarrow did well, and it's like, you know, I'm in yarrow heaven. You guys are gonna like love. We in the next few videos, the yarrow is gonna be so good because I have like every color in the rainbow. Like the yarrow makes me so happy. I was laughing because I made the joke so many times. I'm like, oh, we should just be a yarrow farm. We should just like plant a half acre of yarrow. And so now I'm at the point with the yarrow farm plan where I'm like, okay, well, this is the problem of being a yarrow farm. There's only so much yarrow you can sell. I now have 3,000 stems of yarrow. And it's like, well, should I pick it? I'm not gonna be able to sell it. Should I pick it and dry it? Or should I just like leave it and enjoy it? Because, if I don't pick it, it'll kind of last on the plants for, like a month and a half. It'd be beautiful. So the problems of being a yarrow farm is trying to find someone to buy all your yarrow. But yeah, so we have yarrow, which makes me happy, but money makes me more happy. Feverfew, and then that was it. Like we didn't, and yarrow and feverfew is gorgeous, but it's the base for a bouquet. Without something, without like a peony in the center, it's really difficult to sell as an arrangement, even as a $20 arrangement. And so we didn't do the market last week. We held off from doing the market, which was fine because we went on a vacation. We took advantage of the weird weather, because it's going to be busy once the summer hits. It's difficult for us to find time to do family vacations. So we pulled the kids out of school. We went to Seattle. We had a really nice week, but that's not what's supposed to happen. What's supposed to happen is that we're supposed to have flowers. Like I planted to have flowers, many flowers every week of the year, and I would have been a lot more worried, right? Because I'm only going to have yarrow and feverfew for a long time, right? Like I said, like, I'm still weeks out on my status. My zinnias are this big. I'm not going to have zinnias probably until like August. My cosmos, we're like beginning of July here. Even my cosmos, end of July for cosmos. A few of them are budding. Marigolds. Oh, stock's so gone. Stock like finished with like the tulips almost. The problem with the weather was that everything bloomed at the exact same time. It was like, oh, your tulips are ready, and your ranunculus is ready, and your peonies are ready, and your stock is ready. And they bloomed, and then they were done. It in the way that so I was supposed to have a 6-week window of tulips, and instead the weather compressed it into 2 weeks. The same thing happened for the entire farm. It wasn't just tulips that it happened to. What actually happened was, I had 10 weeks of spring planted on the farm, and it got compressed into 4 weeks, right? And so because of that, that now there's that 6-week gap of when I should have had all those things, and my summer crops aren't. My summer crops, yeah, so this was spring. Spring got compressed like this, and normally this is summer, and summer got compressed, like this. And so what that meant is now I have this, which is a window when normally I should have lots of stuff because I should have spring and I should have summer, but instead I have this window that's empty. It's like no flowers. But the moral of the story is, I have lilies. This is my lilies are here to save my butt for the next couple weeks. The bouquets this past weekend for the market, I had there was three designs that we did. They were feverfew, yarrow, raspberry greens. We're still using raspberries as our greenery. Borage. I have all this borage that self-seeds everywhere, and I don't normally use it, but I'm so limited that I need something to bulk up the bouquets. So we're putting borage in every single bouquet, which it looks great. It's an amazing greenery, like textural piece with like a little bit of blue. It's like I'm using it this year because I'm desperate, and it has great vase life. But moving forward, I'm like, borage. This is this is in the farm plan. This is a great crop. Yeah, so feverfew, yarrow, raspberry greens, borage. We have other greeneries. I have some other perennial greens that we'll put like another piece in to add some other texture, and then a lily. And so everything is the same recipe, but because I have pink yarrow, and because I have terracotta yarrow, and because I have white yarrow, we were able to make 3 kind of distinct looking bouquets, because the yarrow being the main color in the bouquet, other than the lilies being the focal, made it so that, you know, they looked different enough in the buckets, that it was kind of like there's options, even though there kind of wasn't. The other thing that is saving our butt right now is my Indian summer rudbeckia. It's just started blooming. And the amazing thing about the rudbeckia just starting blooming is when it first blooms, like kind of the first 2-3 weeks, it's like zinnias. The first couple weeks when it's producing, it's like it produces like a lot, and then the plant slows down, and it keeps producing steadily for me until the end of the season. But the you know the main volume is going to produce kind of over the next few weeks, which means I'll have a flower. I'll have something to sell. I have like 20 of these double Shasta daisies, which are really pretty. They're really romantic and really delicate and really feminine. And so because they look so different from the Shasta daisy and from the rudbeckia, and because they look so different from the lilies, they're, even though, so I have 20 plants, let's say they each produce, I mean, they're pretty productive. So let's say they each produce 15 stems. So that means I have 300 stems in total, because they look so different. So the bouquets we were making, we're using 4 of the daisies. So if I had 300, it's gonna give me 75, let's say, about bouquets that I can make with the Shasta daisies over the next few weeks. But that means that, I can make 10 for the market, and I can have like 2 a day that go into the roadside stand. And so then it's something that visually looks different from my lily bouquets. But yeah, so the lilies that I have planted on the farm is I have mainly Asiatic lilies, which are the unscented lilies. The really bright colors, and the lilies got planted because I was going to succession plant them. So like I have an entire bed that was planted to be my first flush. And then at some other point, I planted another section that was, going to be a later flush. And over the years, I've planted little patches here and there of the Asiatic lilies that I then haven't taken out of the ground after I picked them. So now they come back always at the same time every year. But at this point, I have 1,000 Asiatic lilies planted around the farm. Asiatic and Oriental. And so because I have like a variety of colors, a variety of different Asiatics, I have early blooming Asiatics, and then I have late blooming Asiatics. So when the lilies bloom, I find each variety blooms out over the course of about like 5 days, maybe a week. Like we had some cool weather, and so then they just kind of stopped. They stopped producing. So that color lasted for a week, but in the heat, it could be like, they all bloom in 4 days. But because I have, early, mid, and late season ones, I end up getting about a 2.5 week window for picking off of the lilies. And when the Asiatic lilies, and this is for perennialized
Is
lilies.
that kittens in here?
They're not in here, but if you have questions, go ask Daddy, please. Because they're perennialized, I can't do anything to control when they bloom. They just bloom whenever they bloom. And then following the Asiatics is when the Oriental lilies start. And so I have some of those like scattered throughout the farm too. And the people either really like lilies for the scent, or they really hate, like people either love them or hate them. No one is neutral on them. But the nice thing about the Asiatic lilies is because they're unscented, people are a lot more neutral on it. So if the only thing I had to sell right now was Oriental lilies, I'd be in a lot of trouble because I wouldn't be able to kind of service the majority of my customers. But because they're the Asiatics, I'm really lucking out. So yeah, so this weekend I had Asiatic lilies down for the farmer's market. That's like what all the bouquets are. We were able to make 100 bouquets, because I had 100 lilies that bloomed. I have the lilies to be able to use them in the roadside stand throughout this week. I'll definitely have another 100 that I think I'll be able to harvest for next weekend, so that I'll have lilies again for the farmer's market. And then after that point, when they're going to be starting to fizzle out, there's not going to be very many left. I'll have a few of the Oriental lilies, and my sunflowers will start. Sunflowers are one of the earliest ones. And yeah, so I'm trying to I wanted to share what's happening on the farm, because okay, what's the point? Why am I going off for 40 minutes about like this weather thing and these crops and stuff? So the point is that, I mean, best laid plans of mice and men is kind of the point. On the farm, my plan for this year was, and what my plan for every year moving forward is to have a focal at all points of time on the farm in the window when I'm selling, that's easy and simple for me to grow and to process and to sell. Always having a focal, but also concentrating on a single focal, so that kind of simplifies all the systems for me, is smart, right? But it's also problematic, right? Because so my focal is kind of like how I want the year to go is, I want it to go tulips to ranunculus to peonies to lilies to sunflowers to zinnias to dahlias. That's kind of the plan. And each one of those, in theory, should last me for a month, right? Tulips, I said the tulips should be there for me for 6 weeks. Peonies should be there for me for 4 weeks, and they shouldn't bloom at the same time as tulips. And I'm looking to a lot of these crops because they're also things that, some of them can store really well in coolers. Lilies, like the lilies, when you pick them at the right phase, before they open up, when you have them in the cooler, when you have them stored properly, they actually store like really well. Like I can be picking lilies now that I put into bouquets next week, and it's not going to in any way affect the vase life for them. I've been really focused on this, and it works in theory, but it's good to kind of hedge your bets a little bit, right? So, you know, the lilies are still here for me. The lilies are, you know, my phone. I don't know if it just dropped everyone. But